Before we begin, I want to thank our series sponsors who are listed on the screen, and the South Florida Business Journal, our media sponsor. And now on to our program. Today's moderator is CEO and Director of Aviation at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, which we are widely branding now as FLL. Mark has served in this role since March of 2016. Mark and I first met when he was considering the opportunity at FLL. He came with the highest recommendation of Kent George, our previous aviation director. And a neat story about Mark. He started at the Philadelphia International Airport. He probably hates it when I tell this story, but I think it's fascinating. He started as an intern at Philadelphia International Airport and worked his way all the way up to CEO and director of that airport. And he served as CEO from 2009 to 2016. Locally, Mark is responsible for the overall executive management and operation of FLL and Broward County's North Perry Airport, including the master plan. And hopefully Mark will talk a little bit about that master plan. There's huge opportunities for growth and modernization at our airport, and the investment that the county commission and the administration is putting back into the airport is pretty amazing. They have a phenomenal strategic vision for our airport, and implementation of that capital improvement program is a big part of Mark's day-to-day role. Mark holds a bachelor's degree in aeronautical studies from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and he's an accredited member of the American Association of Airport Executives, and currently serves on the executive committee of its National Board of Directors. And Mark also serves on the Alliance Board of Directors, and we're really glad to have him as a part of our leadership team. He and FLL were named the Alliance's 2019 Executive Development Partner of the Year. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce my good friend and great friend to our community, Mark Gale. Mark?
Thank you, Bob, and good morning, friends and colleagues. I'm honored to be here this morning to serve as the moderator for this session. Bob, thank you to you and the Alliance team. This leadership series has been phenomenal. As you said, today's number 7, lucky number 7, and I'm sure that myself and our very special guest, Mr. Ted Christie, are going to make sure that we don't let anybody down here. We want to keep this conversation moving along and hopefully entertaining and informative at the same time. So very much appreciate being here this morning with everybody. Allow me to begin to introduce our very special guest by reading his bio. Ted Christie is the President and Chief Executive Officer at Spirit Airlines, the largest ultra low-cost carrier in the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Ted joined Spirit in April of 2012 as Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. In January of 2017, Ted was promoted to Executive Vice President, and in his various roles has overseen the responsibility for finance, as well as operations, information technology, and human resources. Ted earned a Bachelor of Business Administration from Finance from the University of Arizona in 1992. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the man of the hour, the one and the only Mr. Ted Christie. Good morning, Ted.
Man of the hour. Okay. Thank you, Mark.
45 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. Heck of an introduction. Appreciate you doing this today, by the way. It's very kind of you to help us, and I want to extend also the thanks to the Alliance for putting this together, and hopefully we can provide a little bit of jocularity today. So looking forward to this discussion.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking time to be with us. In fair disclosure, Ted and I have known each other for years now. We work very closely together, as you might imagine, on a number of different topics. We get together on a very frequent basis, and we've become friends as part of that process. So our goal this morning is to keep the conversation hopefully light and lively and entertaining. Dig a little bit into Mr. Christie's background, have him share his leadership style and then some notes of interest there. One other housekeeping note that I'm going to ask Mr. Christie to take care of right now is to dispel the myth that airline CEOs, or airport CEOs rather, especially this airport CEO, do not get to fly free on Spirit Airlines. For all the ethics people out there, please verify that for me, okay?
That is 100% verified.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Well, we have quite the lineup of things to talk about this morning, Ted, and I took the liberty of trying to divide it into 3 different areas, and I'll jump around a little bit. I have questions for you that are about Ted Christie personally, and a little bit of your leadership style and some things that you've done in the course of your career. Certainly, as the CEO of Spirit Airlines, we're very anxious to hear more about what's happening at Spirit Airlines and some of the things that you've not only faced of recent, but of the past history with Spirit. So maybe some questions that are geared towards Spirit, and then some that will blend between the two. Does that sound okay to you?
Sounds
Awesome.
great.
Very good. Well, first, for the benefit of our viewing audience, we're going to get into questions about you in a second, but set the stage for us. Spirit Airlines has had a completely fascinating history, starting in 1990 with just 2 airplanes. I think the first service into Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International was in 1993. Can you just tell us a little bit about the airline and how it's come into being one of the most major airlines, not only in the U.S., but internationally today? And we're proud to have you serving us here in the hometown.
Well, we're proud to be here. Fort Lauderdale is both our physical home as well as Fort Lauderdale Airport is our single largest operation. This summer, we'll reach 100 flights a day. As Mark knows, we are the largest airline here in Fort Lauderdale, and we're proud of that. And we love the state of Florida. Better than 50% of our capacity touches the state. Just next week, we'll be launching our 6th destination in Pensacola in Florida. So we're a proud part of the Florida community as well as the Broward community, and looking forward to continuing that forward. But you're right, Spirit is an interesting transformation story and a bit of a case study in how airlines can both be successful and not. It did start in the 90s by an entrepreneur named Ned Homsfeld in Detroit, and started service from Detroit to a few sun destinations and beach destinations, really as a traditional 2-class airline with a business class product and a coach product, and what you would label in somewhat pejorative ways a spill carrier. What that means is they pick up traffic that other airlines aren't flying. And I would say that version of Spirit had kind of a checkered history of being able to succeed. It was struggling to try to find its footing wherever it went. But in the mid-2000s, Spirit was purchased by a few private equity groups and transformed into this ultra low-cost model that was really pioneered in Europe by Ryanair and in Asia by AirAsia. And the management team and the ownership group then looked around the world and said, well, what airlines are really working and where is their growth opportunity? And what surprises a lot of people to hear, especially those of us in the business community, because we do travel frequently on airplanes, is that the vast majority of air travel is done by the top 10% of wage earners in the country. And really, it's the top 5%. And so the theory they espoused is if we can come in with the lowest possible fare in the marketplace, we can actually bring more and more of the market to the skies. And in doing so, create a growth vehicle rather than just a stable vehicle. And so that theory advanced in the mid-2000s, has now blossomed into what we see today. So I joined the airline in 2012. The company had gone public in 2011 and traded publicly. And we had about 35 airplanes at that point. And what's happened since then is we're now 160 plus airplanes. We're now the 7th largest airline in the United States. And over the next 5 years, we'll double again in size. So we'll probably be north of 300 or so airplanes over that period of time, mostly because the traffic that we carry are people that are being stimulated. They are using their discretionary spend to do air travel rather than doing something else. And that's where the growth is in the market. And that's really what Spirit is about growing into new markets and creating new opportunity.
So quick follow-up on that. Going back to my time up in the Northeast part, and in particular Atlantic City, where Spirit was a mainstay there. And I used to travel from Philadelphia to Atlantic City to take flights down to Myrtle Beach to play golf. And you know, you've had branding and marketing advertisements out there in the past, a home of the Bear Fair, the $9 red light special. I was flying Spirit Airlines for $9. I felt like you were actually paying me to fly to go from Atlantic City to Myrtle Beach. how does an airline with pricing at that, and maybe it's a little bit different today, but how would you actually make revenue enough to cover expenses in an environment like that?
Well, we're still a mainstay in Atlantic City and Myrtle, by the way. Those are kind of core Spirit locations along with Florida, but the structure is very similar to what you described today. We're still a very, very low fare carrier. Our average fares in the markets we serve, that would be all inclusive, so that includes all the options you would buy on Spirit or any other airline, are about 40% lower than the prevailing fare in the market. We still offer very much promotional fares. You mentioned the old $9 fare club. We've now rebranded that as the Spirit Savers Club, but the concepts are still the same, that you can, if you're a member of that club, you get access to lower priced inventory and discounts on ancillary services like bags. And so the way that we make money is that you have to start with the absolute lowest costs in the business. The theory that I espoused earlier is pure economics, which is if you come into a space where the prevailing product is largely commoditized, which means that people tend to buy it based on price, which for air transportation, 80+% of surveyed consumers are choosing based on price. And so with that as a backdrop, if you can deliver that product reliably with a much lower cost structure, then you can charge lower fares and open the opportunity to more people. So Spirit achieves a much lower cost structure largely because we are more efficient with the assets that we own, those principally being the airplanes. And by efficiency, the most expensive real estate in the world, by the way, is on an airplane. So the physical space on board an airplane is more expensive than any other real estate you can buy. And so what we do is we put more seats on the airplane, which makes that airplane more efficient per seat. And we fly the airplane more hours per day. And that allows us to create more opportunity with the same fixed asset. And that's how we get our low cost structure, which then translates into a very low fare for our guests.
Very good. I appreciate the background for the benefit, certainly of our audience, to understand Spirit Airlines and your model and how you work possibly a little different than others in the marketplace. We'll shift gears into Ted Christie. I shared with Ted, and I read it in his bio, that he started with Frontier in 2002. My first aviation job, I'm coming up on 40 years in the business next year, was in 1982, working for an airline that went bankrupt shortly after I started working for them. I did not cause the bankruptcy, I swear, but it made me shift gears and go into the airport environment. But I had a love for aviation at that point in time, all different types, and clearly I still do. Ted, how did you get interested in the aviation and airline industry? What was your path, and where do you think it's going to ultimately take you as you continue leading Spirit?
Yeah, another kind of, everyone's got a different story. You just mentioned yours, which is, it sounds like you definitely had a curiosity. You went to Embry-Riddle. So I definitely know that you were interested in aviation and all that it could afford. For me, it was a little bit different. What I really wanted to do was be a rock musician. That's the only thing I wanted to do. I invested a lot of my time in figuring out ways to make that happen. And I still, love it today, but it was never going to materialize for me. At the same time that I was trying to make that work, I was building career milestones. So I started out with a degree in finance and almost the equivalent of a second major in political science. I had some curiosity about policy and how that interacted with commerce. So I started out working at state government in Arizona while I was gigging with my band, and eventually found my way to an economist position at the Department of Revenue there, where you're actually interacting with legislature and the governor's office to make to cost proposals on tax legislation. And I thought that was going to be close to what I was thinking would be intriguing policy discussion. And I just found it wasn't right for me. And so my wife and I decided, you know what, it's time for us to make a change from in physical location. Let's try something in the mountains. So I started looking for work. I found a place at a leasing company in Denver. We moved ourselves up to Denver because we were also ski buffs, and it seemed like a great place to live. And I found that I was really intrigued by how natural commerce worked, and how businesses figure out ways to solve problems, and financing of assets, and the structuring of deals. I really liked transactions. I thought that was a really fun thing to do. And I got immersed in that with the principal other person at that company, who was the general counsel. We were doing all of the deals. And he got recruited to be general counsel at Frontier Airlines, which was the hometown airline there in Denver. And he called me up about 2 months later and said, man, the CFO could really use a hand here. Do you want to have a breakfast with him? So I went and had breakfast with the CFO. At the time, Frontier was a publicly traded business. And it was a chance to work for a CFO of a public company. I didn't know anything about airlines. I had no idea other than I understood how business worked, and he was willing to teach me everything I needed to know about aviation. And so I kind of jumped in as a manager level person, running financial planning. And then he was a great person insofar as every time I had an interest in something, he was willing to include me and eventually give it to me. And I expressed massive curiosity in anything that I could get my hands on. And so it was a good relationship because he gave and I took. And I think that's a big part of, everyone approaches their career a little bit different, but for me, it was important that I was always learning. I was always picking up something new, and I had somebody working with me who was willing to teach and who was willing to give. And so you mentioned that, by 6 years, I had eventually replaced him as CFO. And I think that's a product of that give and take because, I worked over 6 years. I probably picked up a lot of experience that would have taken longer in a different scenario. So now that I'm in aviation, I'm addicted to it because of the pace and the dynamics of the business, the frustrations that it can drive from a day-to-day basis. We deal with commodity fluctuations and weather and operational challenges, and we're a high fixed cost business because we buy expensive assets and we're very levered, and all of those things create challenges. But the Spirit Group is, in my opinion, and you're going to be shocked here, it's the best group in the aviation business by a mile. We're a very creative thinking group. We've really reinvented the way airlines work in North America. And we're proud of that. And we've got a little chip on our shoulder because we want to be the best. And we want to help more people travel and see their family and friends. And that's the energy that drives this company. And it's one of the reasons that I love getting into work every day.
Bob mentioned some of the things that we're looking to do as an airport. I wanted to share with the group. We've gone through the pandemic, and we're going to talk about the pandemic in a second. But coming out of the pandemic, Spirit Airlines has really rocketed forward. You planned your emergence from the pandemic, I think, strategically very, very well. Just from a benchmark perspective, I've mentioned that Spirit Airlines carried more passengers through FLL in April of this year than you did in April of 2019, pre-pandemic, by a very large margin, by the way, over 90,000 passengers. And I think it's an indication to your strategy and how you're bringing the airline forward as we start to emerge. The benefit, again, for those in the audience, Ted and I typically have either a breakfast or a lunch every single month with members of our team so that we can talk about what's working, what's not working, where do we need to focus on certain things. That went to virtual during the pandemic for a while, as opposed to something over at the diner. We want to get back to those diner meetings here soon. But in the process of those virtual meetings, and only because you raised it at this point, Ted, I was going to bring it up later. I was noticing these guitars on the back of the walls that were behind Ted. Beautiful guitars that were all up on the walls, and he shared his band experience in the back. So inquiring minds want to know, Ted, what were the name or names of your band? Did you have a nickname like Slash or anything else along those lines? Or what can you share with us about that little tidbit in the next 30 seconds or so?
Okay. Well, anyone who knows me knows I'm not cool enough to have any nickname like that. I did have a couple of bands. I had one in Arizona called the Dirt Farmers, and we did actually have some modest degree of success. We released a couple of records and, did a lot of gigging and playing and that sort of thing. And then I had a band in Colorado called the Slicks. All of it was sort of like rock and roll, just fun, really. And I still play today. And I think it's important that I have an outlet that's different, than just working all the, we all work very hard. I know you do too. And your team works really hard. And my team works really hard. But personally, it's just a good idea that you do something that's a little bit off the beaten, in my opinion, off the beaten path. And we focus on our families too. And that's important to me as well. I have 2 daughters and I've been married now for 25 years. And I try to make sure you find balance, even though in our industry, it's difficult to do. So no cool nicknames is the answer to the question. Way too much investment in expensive guitars, absolutely true. But it's a fun outlet.
We'll think of a nickname before the end of the show, and we might have lost half of our audience. They're on eBay right now looking for the Dirt Farmer CD.
Not going to find it. Not going to find it.
So, continuing on with your leadership, you talked a little bit about the work that you were doing while you were, with the CFOs, rising through the ranks, if you will. Our industry, the airline industry in particular, has had some huge, well-known giant names, Bob Crandall, Herb Kelleher, and even some of your colleagues that you work with today, Doug Parker over at American, Gary Kelly at Southwest, Scott Kirby over at United and whatnot, all folks that are driving those airlines. If you think about the leaders that you've either worked with or around, the Titans, who comes to mind and what impressions have they had on you in terms of your leadership at Spirit Airlines?
Well, I've had the great pleasure to work for just a handful of CEOs and also a handful of CFOs that have either worked with me or for me over my career. And I've always told people this. I've taken a little bit of each one of those people into what I've learned about how I interact today. I'm still my own person. I still have my own kind of approach to things. Which if you ask my team, sometimes they probably have some colorful ways to describe, but generally, first and most important thing is you surround yourself with people you trust and that you can enjoy their time and that you can learn from and that you can teach. I mentioned those 2 things before. I think that's a really important part of leadership. It's a 2-way street. Thankfully, the people that work with me every day are smarter than I am. And I think that's important that I'm learning something every day from them. But I've worked with some great leaders. One of my primary mentors is a guy by the name of Sean Menke. He was the CEO at both Frontier and Pinnacle, and I worked for him at both places as CFO. He now runs Sabre Airline Solutions, and he and I became close compatriots. He's a different guy than me. He's a very disciplined, focused, challenging, brilliant person. And I tend to be a little bit more easygoing and that sort of thing. And so I think he was a good foil, and I learned a lot about how he led people. The 2 previous CEOs I worked for here at Spirit, both Ben Baldanza and Bob Fornero, definitely unique people with 2 different approaches to things, but things that I thought were important to me. Ben's a creative type. Bob's a very much an operational and focused leader, and I think I could pull things out of that as well. I think it surprised me a little bit to learn as I took the seat as CEO exactly how reliant you are as a leader of any organization on the people that you work with every day and how collaborative that experience is, especially for us at Spirit. I can't speak for every business that way, but I know that that's the way it works best for me and it works for us, is that we're really doing this together. And I think if you polled my group, they would say that. When we discuss where we're going as a company and what we want to do for our guests and what we want to do for our team members, we're doing that together. It's not me dictating. And I think that works really well for us. And it just so happens to jive with the way I think about life. And so that's my approach anyway.
You know, when you mentioned Ben Baldanza, formerly with U.S. Airways many years ago, I knew Ben back then, and Bob Fernaro, who preceded you as the CEO and formerly with other airlines, including AirTran. I had the opportunity to sit with Bob on a flight for about 3 hours, just chit-chatting away when I came down to Fort Lauderdale. And the focus that you mentioned with you know, when Ben was CEO, there was a lot of focus in on, you know, profit, and maybe some of the other things were going by the wayside, if you will, maybe not purposely, but whether it was on-time performance or the guest experience. And my conversation with Bob was, okay, well, you know, we'll turn a profit, but we really need to focus in on the guest experience and doing on-time performance. It seems that you, particularly with your financial background and coming up through the company and our interactions with who you've brought in to kind of help focus in on that guest experience, is making you the CEO that you are today at Spirit Airlines, of taking those two different things and making sure that they meld, you know, correctly. Are there any key tips that you would throw at us as an airline CEO? Because sometimes, you know, in order to provide that great guest experience, you might think it's going to cost more and it's going to raise, you know, your expenditures and whatnot. Anything you can share with us about your philosophy on how to achieve both of those in our worlds today?
Well, I think your summary of Spirit's evolution, especially under my two predecessors, is spot on. You know, Ben was faced with a challenge, which was take a business that was prior to the change was largely failing, and figure out a way to make that work. And I think he did that masterfully. In doing so, you prioritize the things that are important. And the first thing that was important then was creating a product and a business that could work. And at times that meant that focus on other things had to wait, to be honest. When Bob took over, he said exactly what you said. It sounds like you got your ear bent for 3 hours, which Bob can absolutely do. And he said, you know what, there's something in here that says we just have to be better operators. We have to be a more quality product. And so he really put in place disciplines for us as a management team that said, we can still do this and be who we are. And what I've been trying to do is enforce a lot of those two things together. Let's be creative. Let's think about new ways to approach the business. At the same time, low cost doesn't have to be quote unquote cheap. What it has to be is high value. You know, the example I like to use, and it can be for a wide array of products, and I'll show it to you here. My watch is a Casio watch. I bought it for $69 at Costco about 15 years ago. And that's the watch I wear every day. And for me, this watch has tremendous value because it tells time every day. And it's not about how expensive it was. It's whether or not the exchange of that value was fair. And I feel like I paid and got a tremendous value in return. Spirit's the same way. Some travelers on airlines want a luxury experience. They want to have, you know, the full service. And there are airlines that offer that product very well today. You mentioned some of them earlier in your conversations. All we said was, we believe there is an untapped market for people who want to be able to travel, but want to be able to do it at the most affordable way. And so blending that experiment with high reliability and good value is the way we're going to deliver the product to them. And so learnings from Ben and learnings from Bob, and then what my team has been able to do, where Last year, we were basically the most reliable airline in the United States. We had the fewest cancellations on a rate basis of any airline in the United States. We were number 3 in on-time performance. This year, based on last year's performance, we were recognized as one of Fortune magazine's most admired companies in the world. There were only 8 airlines in the world recognized. There were only 3 in the United States. And the other 2 brands are the ones everyone talks about. And so I think Spirit is actually doing things to change the market and doing things to advance aviation to more and more people, because the power of travel is so aspirational. It makes you feel good. You get to go to see new places. All we're doing is saving you the extra $200 so that when you get there, you can have a nicer dinner or stay at a nicer hotel. And that's a pretty powerful brand.
Kudos and congratulations on that recognition, by the way. It is a testament, I think, to the leadership that you and your team and what you're doing with the airline as we move forward here. So we'll shift gears a little bit. You take over the reins as CEO January 1st, 2019. You're trucking along. Things are really looking good. A lot of great things are happening in the airlines, and all of a sudden, boom, pandemic hits about a year and 2 months into your tenure as CEO. I went back and I caught a couple of different interviews that you've done. You're in high demand, Ted. There's no doubt about that. People love talking to you, as we do right now. But I picked up an interview that you did with Future Terminal Experience and the Apex guys, Joe Leader in particular, and that was in May of 2020. And so 2 months into the pandemic, and there were these discussions about glimmers of recovery, if you will. People were getting excited because we saw a grand total of 250,000 passengers being screened in the United States, the entire United States. As we just saw with the latest holiday weekend, we're looking at 2 million passengers screened on a daily basis, and that's where we were pre-pandemic. But you were answering questions there about how things look. As a leader, it's got to be one of the most difficult times that an airline leader has ever faced in a number of different dark times within our history. What got you through that with your team? Where were you focusing on? And how much of what you did to deal with the moment at that point in time do you think is going to continue and stay in place as part of the culture of Spirit Airlines and carry you forward an even better trend?
Yeah, heck of a year for all of us, as we've each dealt with our own professional and personal challenges. I know what the airport went through as well, and I know what other businesses have had to go through, and what people are dealing with at their houses, teaching their kids math, at home, and being locked up and not doing your regular life experience stuff. It's just been an unquestioned challenge for everybody. In my 20 years, and I think if you go back even to prior to that, if you just looked at the airline business post the Deregulation Act in the 70s, when airlines really became a commercial enterprise, if you added up all of the crises over that period of time, it still wouldn't get you to what we've all been through over the last year. Airlines really took a significant body blow over this period of time. In the peak of the pandemic, in the summer of last year, the aviation industry in the United States was burning somewhere north of $7 billion. And it was just a scary, scary number to talk about. But the things that we focused on here, and I had some experience in crisis. You mentioned in my intro that I did restructure at Frontier. And I've been through the oil spikes, the great financial crisis, the fallout of 9/11. These are things that I've been through, and as a finance professional, I think that gave some comfort, certainly to the team around us and at my board level, because they knew that I had experience in dealing with the challenges that you face in that type of environment. Is you need liquidity, you need to figure out ways to extend the runway. And we've been able to do that before. But what I found during those early days, and that conversation with Joe that you mentioned, May, I was probably just emerging from under my desk at that point. But the things you rely on are, you have to stay calm. As a leader, people want to know that these are not the kind of things that will change long-term view, and we never felt that way. We always felt that Spirit had a long-term objective that would not change. And if anything, we were looking for ways that we could potentially take advantage of what was happening around the crisis. So you had to keep a level head, make sure you were listening to the things you were hearing from the organization, and doling out the necessary activities at a measured pace, because you can easily get overwhelmed in a period like that. So that was the first thing. The second is that, and I mentioned it earlier, I relied heavily on my group, the Spirit team, and that extends beyond the management team. That includes our flight attendants, our pilots, our technicians, the people who work at the airports, the people who work in our supply chain organization at our warehouses. All of those people stepped up because, airlines were looking at significant job losses. People were having to institute furloughs. They were doing a variety of things. And Spirit, because of the actions of the team, was able to largely avoid all of that. And our team pulled together. The management team found out new solutions. We raised $1.5 billion in the public markets with a series of creative transactions that were done by our finance department and our legal department. Our network team swung the airline around from, you mentioned that today we're larger in Fort Lauderdale than we've ever been. Our average daily departures now system-wide are approaching 700 departures a day. That's a little bit bigger than we were in the beginning of the pandemic. But we went from 650 departures to 50 over the course of 2 weeks. And then we had to find ways to find pockets of demand. Where are the people? Where are they going? And so our network's thrown around, and that creates challenges for our scheduling team, and that creates challenges for our crew planning and our crew staffing team and the maintenance department to figure out ways to put airplanes to bed, to bring them back to work. And there was no quit. I mean, I kept looking around going, is anyone around here going to take a nap, or what's going on? Because they literally showed no quit. It was the kind of thing that as a leader of any organization would bring you to tears, because my group just rallied. They got better. And when you think about takeaways, Mark, it's establishing a culture of work ethic and camaraderie that can get you through the good and bad times. And then there are clearly tactical things that we learned over that period of time about how we approached our network plan and how we approached our crew plan and what we did with airplanes and all of that we are definitely incorporating in. There's communication learnings. I spent the vast majority of the last year and a half talking to our group. And we would do that before, but I just did it a lot more. And when I'm out on the airplanes, which I am regularly, I know that our frontline team appreciates that. It's one of the odd things about running an airline is we have 25,000 team members in the country today, but only about 700 of them work in the office. Everyone else is flying in airplanes and working at airports, so it's hard to see them every day. You got to get in front of those people and talk to them about what's happening, because it removes the sting of reality. And so there's definite learnings there, but it starts with the culture of the business, and luckily we have a strong one.
In times of crisis, teams look to their leader to kind of help them not only get through the day, but kind of figure out where are we going, and do we have confidence in our leader to be able to help navigate the troubled waters here. You talked about how you and your team reacted to some of the issues of the pandemic and are continuing to react to it. What about Ted Christie? What do you think you learned about yourself through this pandemic that maybe you didn't realize before? A trait or maybe something that you, in looking at the mirror every single day before you go into work and say, this is what I want to accomplish today. Do you think you have any takeaways from, even though we're not all the way through the pandemic, in terms of what you might have learned about yourself?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mentioned that I'd been through some challenging events in my career in this industry, and probably one of the most difficult days for me was at Frontier Airlines on the day we decided to file for Chapter 11. I actually wasn't even the CFO yet, so they hadn't even moved me into that position yet, and I was not prepared for that. I was in my mid to late 30s, and I didn't know what I was walking into, and there were moments of despair there that I felt like I had that feeling of anxiety, like I don't know if I can handle this, and because of the leader that I reported to, who I mentioned earlier, was able to kind of get me through that part of the crisis. I think during this one, I was able to provide a little bit of that. I've seen stuff like this before, and that was a big way for me to help dispel myth, to help people feel a little bit more at ease. I hope anyway, and so there was an element of calm, I guess, that was important, and a takeaway for me from that first experience that I brought to this one as a leadership trait. There's also the personal aspect of this particular crisis, because it was so pervasive in our entire life, that it influenced the way your family interacts, and so I'm so very proud of my family. My wife is a fantastic person who has always been by me whenever we've been through bad things and good things, been moved the family at times for different changes. And I'm extremely proud of the girls that we've raised together. And they went through a tough year. I think a lot of people on this meeting can appreciate that. But I tried to bring them closer. And spend more time talking to them about things. And I think that's another thing that's just so critical in your human experiment, is that you gotta be present. And it's tough when you're running a big airport in the United States, or you're running your own business and you're responsible for 5 or 6 people's pay every day, or you're running an airline, or you're doing, all those things create vacuums for time. But you have to find the time for the people you love and care about too. And while I'm imperfect at that by a mile, that was another reminder that life is short and you got to stay in front of your family.
Well said. I think everybody on the call would agree with you that as strong as we think we all are individually, there are more times than not somebody that's behind us, holding us up to prevent us from falling down, or helping to pick us back up when we get knocked down. Family is backbone, and really, really glad that you responded to that question. Ted, I appreciate it. We had a question come in on the chat box from Rosita, our friend over at FRLA, and Rosita asked, when I was a DMO, we used to partner with Spirit to promote our destination in cities that Spirit serviced. Do you see a partnership program like that coming back in the near future?
Well, we're appreciate the question. We're always looking at creative ways to market our service, to create partnerships around the way we fly and where we fly. We are somewhat unique in the airline industry in that if you look, we're not traditional marketers. While we have in and around Fort Lauderdale, we'll periodically have traditional marketing like billboards and signs and that kind of thing. But we advertise our product online in ways and distributed ways that make it attractive to the people who want to shop for affordable air travel. And then we rely on our partners to help us. Those are our airport partners a lot of the time, helping us come up with ways to promote our service, to make it intriguing and exciting, because we do fly to a lot of exciting places. So there's always ways for us to be creative in that regard. And we've done some kind of oddball deals to promote our service from time to time, but yes, the answer is we're always looking for creative partnerships to advance, the Spirit story.
Thank you to Rosita for that question, and we have a few minutes left. Rosita said thank you, and anybody other questions that come in, we have one that let's see. Gail is asking. Mark, curious about any risk that Ted has taken in the past and any advice. It was actually another question that I was going to ask. As a CEO in any business, it really entails a lot of the whole analysis of risk reward. And certainly the airline business is laden with risk reward opportunities,
Yes.
particularly in this environment. And we talked a little bit about where you might go with the airline in the future, which may require some risk. Can you talk a little bit about both risk for the company, risk for Ted Christie, and on how you're going to continue to lead Spirit Airlines?
Yeah, so you're right. One of the primary responsibilities as a steward of this business, for the people who work here, for the people who've invested their capital in it, for the people who rely on it every day to go and see their family and their friends, or to take care of a small business trip or something like that, we have to be managing opportunity and risk across the spectrum. That's capital risk. That's the risk associated with transportation in and of itself, which the business does have a lot of ways that we've addressed those risks over the years. That's business opportunity risk, and how we tackle the opportunity that we see in front of us. And yes, we absolutely take calculated risks all the time. We tend to do it on a metric basis. So we're a very analytical group that evaluates the opportunity, looks for a way to measure that opportunity, and decide whether or not it's large enough to justify either the investment of capital or the investment of time, or any of those other risks that we're looking to mitigate. And we've absolutely done that. We've gotten big in places, for example, that people would have said, why is a low-cost carrier growing their presence in a place like Newark Airport, for example, which happens to be a very expensive airport? Well, we see an opportunity with that that may be unique, that's different than the way other airlines have approached it. And we have a unique and growing franchise in Latin America. And we serve 26 or 27 destinations in Latin America today out of your airport and a few others. And there are different unique risks with approaching those markets that Spirit over time has learned from and has become a bit of a subject matter expert on. And that creates a market niche opportunity that we've evaluated as well. We deploy capital in different ways by buying airplanes or not buying airplanes, or investing in technology, or investing in unique technology like biometric recognition technology at airports, because we think that's going to be a better experience for our guests. And so there's capital investment risks, there's operational challenges that we face that we tackle every day. And I think the best way to think about it, at least for us, is can you distill it down to something that's measurable? And if you feel like it is, that's how you could justify your rate, because otherwise it's just nebulous.
We only have time for maybe one or two more questions, Ted. There's a couple that are in the chat box right now. One is from Bill Clayton. What is a trend that you see taking place in the airline industry that you never expected to see pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID. Well, aside from the obvious, which is, the COVID-related changes we've all seen, facial coverings on board airplanes, the intensity with which our industry has swiftly reacted to cleanliness and disinfecting of physical properties, both at your airport and on board aircraft. But I think booking trends are different than they used to be. The way people think about when they buy their ticket and how much flexibility they have in after they've bought their ticket is different than it was pre-pandemic. I think that people have learned from what they've experienced over the last year, and nobody likes the idea of A, getting stuck somewhere where you can't get back, or B, investing in a product for future delivery that you're not sure whether or not is going to work out. And I think the airlines are already trying to think of ways to address that market opportunity. What are ways we can create flexibility for people and do it in ways that product drives value to them? And I think we're thinking about that too. That's definitely changed since the pandemic, and that probably doesn't surprise anybody.
There's a follow-up from Bob Swindell that says, as we're looking to the future, again, the pre-COVID, post-COVID, and the things that we've all had to kind of adapt to, I've made mention before that sometimes that the speed of technology and innovation does not match the speed of acceptance and understanding of technology. Not everybody is as savvy across the board, and we have to accommodate for that. But as you're looking forward to employing new technology, including here at FLL with self bag tag, self drop, biometrics, and things along those lines. The question is, what do you think our passengers will experience, maybe in the near term or midterm, as we manage our way through an airport and get onto your airplanes from a technologically speaking basis?
Yeah, I think that, and again, every potential airline customer is a little bit different. Some people definitely want a higher touch experience, but what we know about our guests, because we survey them frequently, is they like ease of use. They want simplicity, and they generally want technological interaction. So that starts with the first interaction, which is whether or not you're searching for a ticket, and it ends with the claim of your bag and the resolution of any issues. And over the course of that travel window, we're exploring ways to make that easier. Our mobile application, for example, which we developed years ago, but have made steady progress on, is now a 4.8 out of 5-star rated app on the App Store, and that's because it's easy to use. And you mentioned self-bag drop and self-bag tag machines at the airport. People like that because it's faster. And they want speed. They want to be able to get to the airport, drop their bag, get through security, get on board the airplane with as minimal frustration and interaction as they can. And we see the use of biometrics, the use of mobile technology, understanding the needs of the individual guest and presenting them with products that actually suit them more actively is going to be another component of technology for us. So that's merchandising and product design that's going to be rolled out over time, and it'll make it easier for you to buy the things that are important to you, which is pretty great. It's the simplicity of being on Amazon, buying something, and you get to see underneath it says, people have also bought this, right? And a lot of times that works because it's something you need. So it's definitely going to drive the Spirit experience because it's going to be easier to use. And that's a buzzword we talk about all the time, ease of use.
One last question from the chat box, and then we'll begin to wrap it up here. And for those that we didn't get to in the chat box, I'll work with our friends at the Alliance to maybe work offline to get them some answers to the questions that they put in there. I didn't want them to feel like we're ignoring them. But the question came in, it says, working for a publicly traded company requires discipline and caution. What lessons can you share with other leaders, especially those on this call, from your experience in a publicly traded world?
Without a doubt, it is there's obviously clear benefits to being part of the public community, access to capital being the most obvious. It is a unique way for capital intensive businesses like the airline business to have free access to capital and affordable access to capital. And nothing that has proven true ever more so over the last year and a half. So that's the benefit. There are definite challenges with that. Is the way you talk about your company in forums like this, for example, the way that we make sure that we're always following all of the regulations that the SEC has put in place to make sure that our story is told correctly. And it's a visible when you're a publicly traded entity, everything about you is very visible and discussed. And for that reason, you have to use care in taking care of all of the capital that you're in charge of, making sure that your investors are getting a fair shake, and that they understand what's happening with your business. And we spend a good deal of time about our disclosure and making sure that people know exactly what it is we're trying to do, so that when they invest in our business, they've got the right story. And I think it's a stewardship thing. Are you doing the right by your stewards? And when you're public, it's just even more refined than normal. And that's probably the biggest takeaway.
Spotlight is on, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up the excellent adventures of Mark and Ted series here, one last question, Ted, for you, and it could be a very short answer. What would you tell a young Ted Christie just starting out into the business? And would you change anything that you've done along your path on your obviously very great career thus far, and it's going to continue to do so?
Well, let me finish by saying again, Mark, thanks. It was great to have this chat. I'm not surprised you did a masterful job because you're good at this kind of thing. And thanks to the Alliance for allowing me to come in and blather on about my my background. Hopefully some people took something away from it. I've lived a life that I've been very happy with, and I feel very fortunate because some of the things that I've landed on have been by accident. I described how I found my way to the airline business, or how I met my wife in racquetball class at the University of Arizona. That was an accident, a happy accident. And these are life-changing events, and I wouldn't change a single thing. I have no regrets about anything that I've done. I've surrounded myself with very close personal friends that I'm extremely proud of, and I've maintained those relationships on purpose, and I'm proud of that too. And I think that that's just, the way, at least for me personally, the way I've gone about my existence. And I would tell my 21-year-old self to just do that, because it's a happier landing spot.
Ted, thank you so much for spending the time with us all this morning and sharing your life story here and where you're headed with Spirit Airlines. Thank you for the professional relationship that we enjoy. Thank you for the personal friendship that we enjoy, and for leading Spirit Airlines and all that you do for the Broward County community. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark and Ted. Phenomenal conversation. I say this every month, but when you think they can't get better, the conversations continue to improve, and really appreciate your time this morning. Ted, your airline is making such a huge investment in South Florida, particularly Broward County. We're really proud of the direction you're taking the airline. The accolades you're receiving nationally speak volumes for the experience that you're developing for the passengers as well. The fact that you both have navigated your businesses through a pandemic that, even with the best contingency plans, has exceeded anything that we could have ever thought of 16 months ago. I mean, we think, preparing for a hurricane is a Herculean task, but you guys have masterfully maneuvered through really the unthinkable in an industry that's been hard hit, almost worse than any other industry in the country. So kudos to both of you. And again, thanks for taking time this morning. A lot of great, valuable lessons. Every time I was preparing to ask a question, Mark, either you asked or somebody else asked it. So couldn't ask for a better interview than that. Thanks again to our sponsors who are on the screen, and as well as our media sponsor, the South Florida Business Journal. Check out today's South Florida Business Journal issue, which includes an in-depth look at how COVID pandemic has fueled a resurgence in golfing. So we've seen a downturn in golfing and some courses that have gone under in South Florida, but residents across the nation, including teens and women, are flocking to the greens. Industry insiders review what it could mean for the area golf courses and the long-term prospects for the industry. Also, make sure you see the June 18th issue of the Business Journal for a story on the highlights of today's leadership session. Today's session will be posted online next week, along with each of our other speaker series events at gflalliance.org/speaker series. And I encourage you, if this is the first speaker series that you've been able to watch, please go check out the other speaker series. They really are impactful and share great information. You will walk away with fresh ideas from each of the speaker series. And I want to thank Gale Bulfin again and the team at the Alliance. But this was Gale's brilliant idea, and we want to continue to do it into the future. Our next leadership speaker series is on July 9th, which will feature Robin Motley, General Manager of Media and Senior VP of Revenue for AARP. And an interview will be moderated by Alex Velock, CEO of the Baptist Health Foundation. So again, please plan to tune in on July 9th. Again, thank you all. Appreciate your time. We're adjourned.